Hello everyone, welcome to our channel. Today, let's talk about a classic urban legend related to space-time rifts. The story takes place in 1997. Back then in the United States, there was a radio station called Coast to Coast AM, which was a very famous radio program. It was like the late-night broadcasts we used to listen to when we were young, with a huge audience, sharing all sorts of bizarre and surreal stories. This program was hosted by a person named Arthur Bell, who would chat with the callers about the strange and mystical experiences they had encountered. Just like that, on February 21, 1997, during this radio program, a call came in. The caller identified himself as Mel Waters. He mentioned to the host that he lived on a ridge southeast of Ellensburg, Washington, on a mountain known as Manistache Ridge, a very remote location. The host was unfamiliar with this place, only knowing that it was a vast expanse of wilderness, hills, and such. The host then asked Mel, "What strange story do you have to share with us tonight?" Mel said, "I've been investigating something recently. On that ridge of ours, I found a hole. Let's just call it Mel's Hole. It's about 9 feet and 9 inches in diameter, roughly around 3 meters, not a perfectly circular shape. Some of our neighbors used to treat this hole as a garbage dump, but it's actually not far from my home, close enough for me to keep an eye on it. And you know what? Despite everyone throwing garbage into it, the hole has never filled up." The host remarked that the hole must be quite large and deep. Mel responded, "I initially thought the same way, but it wasn't until something happened that I decided to investigate the hole more thoroughly." The host inquired, "What happened that changed your mind?" Mel continued, "Well, I had a neighbor whose dog passed away. They wanted to give the dog a proper resting place, like a burial, so they disposed of it in the hole, just like how people discard trash or old appliances into it. Everyone thought it was just a deep hole that never filled up. However, a few days later, the neighbor came to me suddenly and claimed that they saw the dog alive, running around near the forest. How did they ascertain that the dog they saw running was the same one they buried?" The neighbor said, "Because I saw the collar on that dog very clearly. It was the one I had put on it. However, when I called the dog, it didn't respond to me, as if it didn't recognize me. It suddenly darted into the forest and disappeared, never to be seen again." This incident led Mel to decide to investigate the hole. According to him, the hole was just a 9 feet and 9 inches hole on the flat ground of the ridge. So, he started lowering a fishing line down, attaching a weight to it, trying to gauge the depth of the hole. He kept lowering the fishing line, reel after reel, but it didn't reach the bottom. He even went through 3 reels of fishing line and still hadn't hit the bottom, indicating that it was incredibly deep. He didn't specify the exact length of a reel of fishing line, and we're not sure about the length of a fishing line reel in the US at that time, but typically a reel of fishing line is at least 100 meters, so that's 300 meters already without reaching the bottom. He then reeled the line back in, feeling perplexed. Was the hole really that deep? Was it continuously expansive downwards, or was there some kind of space down there? He then said, "Next, I started to observe the hole more closely and noticed that very few animals, including flying insects like mosquitoes, would come near the hole. The area around the hole was exceptionally clean. So, I asked my neighbor, since I had recently moved in, how long has this hole been here? Why does it seem so deep and never fill up?" The neighbor informed me that the hole had been there for at least 200 years. He said, "I found it here when I moved in. Isn't that strange?" Determined to delve deeper into the mystery of the hole, since he enjoyed listening to the radio, Mel often carried a radio around, listening while walking and contemplating. One day, he walked up to the hole with his radio, pondering its mysteries, and suddenly the radio started picking up a lot of static. He adjusted the tuning and heard music from decades ago becoming clearer. To his shock, he was listening to a baseball game from 1967 while it was 1997. This startled him greatly, as he couldn't comprehend how this was possible. At that moment, he was very eager to enter the hole himself and have a look, so he kept lingering around the edge of the hole, just lingering. It was at this time, as he described it, that he found a coin. The coin was minted in 1943, which was quite peculiar. As all Americans know, during 1943, it was the time of World War II, right? Well, during that period, it was impossible for coins to bear the likeness of President Roosevelt. However, this particular coin did feature Roosevelt's portrait. He questioned himself, could I be mistaken? Were there coins minted back then with Roosevelt's portrait? Perceiving the coin as highly significant, he decided to preserve it. After some time, he took it to Ellensburg to have it evaluated by a professional numismatist. The coin appraiser also seemed skeptical, saying that it didn't seem like a counterfeit coin, but indeed, there were no coins issued in 1943 bearing Roosevelt's likeness. The appraiser advised, you can leave it here, and I'll do some further research on it. So Mel left the coin appraiser in Ellensburg and did something. What did he do? He bought fishing line. He purchased a large amount of fishing line and then prepared to return to his home to continue investigating the Mel hole. After some time, he reached out to the coin appraiser again to check on the appraisal results. Upon reaching home, he prepared the fishing line, one spool at a time, getting them ready and connecting them, and began lowering it down, down, down. He kept lowering it until 4,500 feet, which is over 1,300 meters, but the hole still hadn't hit the bottom. Mel then slowly reeled all the lines back up, one by one. After pulling them up, he pondered, could there be an underground river down there, or something that carried away or washed away the object? So, he tied a peppermint candy to the weight because peppermint dissolves when it encounters moisture or water. He lowered it down again, gradually, until he had let out over 4,000 feet of line. When he couldn't lower it any further, he pulled it back up and found the peppermint candy intact, indicating there was no water below. Underneath was just emptiness, incredibly deep. Where does this hole lead to? Mel then proceeded to do a few more things. The first thing he did was bring some of his livestock, cows, horses, and dogs, over. It was evident that the animals strongly resisted approaching the hole and were unwilling to get close to it. He also observed that even the flying birds in the sky would not fly over the hole. At that moment, he began to think that the hole might possibly lead to another world or serve as a gateway through a fracture in time and space, and so on. After completing these tasks, he returned to Ellensburg to check on the appraisal results with the coin appraiser. The coin appraiser told him, I couldn't make a definitive appraisal myself. However, when I reported the information about this coin, not long after, the Treasury Department confiscated the coin. I am truly sorry. Here is the receipt they provided. After hearing this, Mel felt that this lead had come to an end. No problem, he thought. I'll investigate on my own. How else could he investigate? He went back to the shop where he bought the fishing line and purchased an even larger quantity of fishing line this time. Much more than before. After returning home, he started lowering it down again, continuously lowering it. This time, he was determined not to stop until it reached the bottom. How much fishing line did he use this time? He used 80,000 feet. What does that mean? It's over 20 kilometers, more than 20,000 meters. What does this mean? We know about the Kola borehole, the deepest borehole in the world drilled by Russia on the Kola Peninsula, which reached a depth of just over 12,000 meters. Mel's line went down twice that depth. Even though it was quite thick, considering that the average thickness of the Earth's crust is around 33 kilometers, it still did not surpass the thickness of the crust. Due to the extreme length of the fishing line, after recording this data, he dropped the fishing line down and listened for any sounds, but of course, he couldn't hear anything. The fishing line continued to fall downward, and he had no idea how deep it was below. What happened after all these events? So, on February 21, 1997, he called the host, Art Bell, and recounted his bizarre experience. Due to the rich details in his description, over 10 million listeners worldwide were captivated by his story. They believed Mel was not lying and were eager to learn more about the aftermath of Mel's experiences. They would inquire during the show, "Hey, did Mel contact you again? What happened?" Art Bell would respond, "Well, he never called us again. We don't know." Many people became very interested and followed the clues to the ridge near his house to find the cave. However, despite their efforts, they did not find the cave or the small village Mel described. It was as if Mel, the cave, and the village had vanished into thin air. This was a very peculiar incident. 3 years passed in the blink of an eye. And by the year 2000, Art Bell suddenly announced on his show, "I have made an agreement with the Mel Waters from back then." He will be joining our show again in a few weeks to talk about the truth of Mel's hole. Everyone was eagerly waiting by their radios. However, on the night of the scheduled appearance, Mel Waters did not call in to speak with them. This left everyone disappointed, including the host, who was left wondering what had happened to Mel. 2 more years passed, and it was now 2002. Suddenly during a show, the Mel Waters from 5 years ago called in again. This time he shared his experiences over the past 5 years. He said, "After I finished that call with you back then, I went out again. Since we live in a rather remote area, we usually need to drive a pickup truck or a truck when going out. When I returned home, I found that the road leading into our village had been blocked off. I asked the police what was going on, and they told me they were investigating a plane crash. I was puzzled, wondering how a plane could crash here. They said, 'Your house is there. I'm sorry, but you can't go back now. This plane crash incident is very serious.' They went on, but it was clear to me that they were just trying to appease me. At that moment, I began to think if this had anything to do with my exposure about the Mel's hole in the media. Perhaps someone had taken notice of it. So, I became very assertive and demanded to speak to their person in charge. I told them, 'I know what you're up to. Don't hide things from me. Let's talk openly.' Eventually, a commanding officer of sorts arrived. According to Mel's account, this person was dressed in all black, not in any military attire. He exchanged a few words with Mel and threatened that they could find unauthorized chemical laboratory beneath his house if Mel caused trouble. 'But you can also choose to sign a confidentiality agreement with us. Then permanently leave this country, and we will give you a certain amount of money each year.' When Mel heard this, he realized it was a blatant attempt to threaten him. Helpless in the situation, Mel understood that the hole might indeed be very mysterious, and he did not want to provoke these unidentified individuals. So, after negotiating with them, he finally reached an agreement, signed a contract, left the United States, and went to Australia, deciding to no longer inquire about the matter. Every year, a sum of money was deposited into his account, and he lived very comfortably. However, after living this way for 3 years, he began to miss his family in the United States and desired to return. Before returning to the United States, many people advised him not to go back, saying that it was too dangerous. He didn't know the backgrounds of those people, or what they had been up to, but Mel still bravely came back, and the time he returned was in the year 2000. That was also the year he had arranged to appear on the show with that Art Bell. At that time, he originally wanted to talk about these things. But on the morning of the day he was supposed to appear on the show, he went to see his nephew, taking a bus there. Once Mel got on that new bus, he felt a sudden blur in his consciousness, and then he didn't remember anything. When he woke up again, it was already 12 days later in San Francisco. In a dark alley in San Francisco, he had many injuries, and some marks from needles being stuck into him. Even his wisdom tooth was aching faintly, and when he touched it, it had already fallen out. He knew he must have crossed some people he shouldn't have, so he didn't think about going to Art Bell to reveal anything or checking his bank account or anything like that. All that money was gone. He was practically penniless. At this point, he was extremely desperate, essentially losing everything. And in the midst of this desperation, he received a court summons, a series of issues related to his previous activities on his land. Violations such as illegal construction of septic tanks, illegally laying underground pipelines, and various other messy matters. From then on, he was entangled in lawsuits. It was like a giant hand constantly pressing him, a man with nothing, to the ground, rubbing for 2 years. He couldn't bear it anymore. In the year 2002, at midnight, he suddenly made another call to Art Bell, recounting his experiences once again. He felt that after telling the story, he might truly disappear from this world, but he also had to finish telling this story. But what comes next? This Mel Waters took a sudden turn in his storytelling. and he unexpectedly told another story. He said that during these 2 years of being entangled in lawsuits, he actually received some help from certain individuals. Whose help was it? He said that there is a group of Basque people in Nevada. They come from the Pyrenees Mountains in Europe, a very mysterious ethnic group in the middle of the mountain range that marks the border between Spain and France. Their language is different from all other languages in the world. They have even traveled to the North Sea to catch codfish around Iceland, and they may have even reached Newfoundland, discovering codfish brought from America. At that time, codfish was one of the best commodities in Europe. The Basque people are very mysterious, and these Basque people later immigrated to the United States, settling in a place in Nevada. He said he received support from these Basque people. These Basque people invited him over to talk about a hole in their public area that was also described as very mysterious, mentioning sacrifices of sheep, and after these sheep were resurrected, something resembling an alien creature jumped out of their bellies, which left the audience bewildered, saying that the tone of this part was completely different. Then he mentioned another thing. They conducted an experiment in that Basque people's hole, where they began lowering a bucket of ice down and down and down, to a great depth. Then they lifted the ice back up, only to find that the ice hadn't melted, but it had changed. It was no longer icy cold, but had transformed into something like powder yet crystal-like. At that point, a Basque priest came and lit a fire, and astonishingly, the ice could burn. He said that the Basque people have known about this cave for a very long time, and they even came to America to pursue this cave and so on. It's like the Basque people have this ability to traverse the Earth's core. They have known about this for a long time, and they wanted to use Mel's voice to speak about this thing. At this point, all the audience was bewildered. This was a completely different style from the previous real story, and just at that moment, Mel said, "Well, that's all for today," and the call was disconnected. This story never had a conclusion. As the story continued to unfold, there were some professionals who came to debunk or prove this story. Among them, there was a geologist named Jack Powell, who said he was born and raised in that area. He knew all the villages and caves on that ridge like the back of his hand. He mentioned that he had indeed seen a 9-foot hole there, but it was just an abandoned mine. There were indeed a few households around, but those households probably all moved away around 1997, 1998. The place was too remote. He had been interested in geology since childhood, often exploring around, and he had seen that hole he talked about, which was likely the mine he saw. I believe his whole story was based on seeing that seemingly bottomless mine and then imagining things. Many people have found that mine, and there are now some photos, including if you search for this Mel's hole on Google Maps. There are many photos of these kinds of ritualistic mine pits uploaded by locals, but clearly none of them match the bottomless pit that Mel described back then. Then the professional geologist Jack Powell, he mentioned that if this Mel's hole really existed, if it was indeed very deep, and not like the mines we see, what could it be? It might be a lava tube, formed by the cooling of erupted lava, creating a deep hole. It could be deep, but definitely not 80,000 feet deep, nor could it involve time travel, animal resurrection, and so on. All of these were stories that Mel Waters imagined based on a mine, and shared with everyone. The story has continued to develop until today. Many enthusiasts from Europe and America have been searching for this cave, yet to this day, no one knows where this cave is. Does such a time-traveling hole really exist or not? This is what we see today. The whole story of Mel's hole, whether there really exist on Earth some of these bottomless, time-traveling caves. In fact, the story is full of mystery. Well, let's end our story sharing here today. Thank you everyone.